Washington secondary is set to improve in a major way in 2023. What'll that look like, especially with the addition of Jabbar Muhammad? Let's find out.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Huskies, thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We cover the Washington Huskies with Inside the Huskies with Fan Nation and Sports Illustrated. You can check out all our work at si.com/college/Washington. Lars, it's great to have you here. And I thought we should just get into this because there's so much to talk about. And we got a really great question in the YouTube comments of the day. My apologies. I can't remember who asked the question. I should have written that down. I should write a lot of things down, but I just kind of go off the top of my head with certain things. But the question that was asked was, where does Jabbar Muhammad fit among all the defensive transfers that have come into the conference, and just kind of where does he rank among, the likes of guys like Jordan Birch from South Carolina, who's at Oregon, and Bear Alexander who transferred from Georgia to USC. And, I think that he might end up being the first or even second most important defensive transfer to come into the conference. And we didn't look at, when we talked about this segment earlier, we didn't necessarily consider guys who transferred from Pac-12 school to Pac-12 school, like Justin Flo, who went from Oregon to Arizona, or Daniel Haimuli, who went from Washington to Arizona. We didn't really think about guys like that. But I think that Jabbar Muhammad has a chance to be what, we all thought that Jordan Perryman was going to do last year. Because it's something where I will hold true to this until the day I die, that Jordan Perryman looked excellent in camp until he went down with an injury in the opening game against Kent State and just couldn't get right after that. But before that, he was running with Rome Odunze stride for stride and was really, really competitive with him. And I think that if Jabbar is able to stay healthy and produce in the same way that he did in the Big 12 last season, that he's a guy who could end up being a first-team All-Pac-12 corner by the end of the year.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. I think the thing to consider with Jabbar is the fact that he does have a whole year of experience, and he's not like a second string or backup guy that's trying to come in and earn a spot. He's already established himself, and I think throughout fall camp we've seen they've just thrown Jabbar to the far side and said, yeah, that's your half of the field. Just take care of it. The question's always been who's going to be opposite of Jabbar. And I think that speaks more to how much of an impact Jabbar already is having. I think, when we talk about Bear Alexander, a few other guys, like Oregon's kind of got some pretty well-known defensive linemen and on the edge, kind of no matter who you put out there, Oregon's kind of got a few guys already. Washington truly didn't have a lockdown, shutdown outside corner. We can talk about, Mish Powell moving from nickel, from corner over to nickel. There's kind of a few different guys moving around, but none of them truly had the year 1 to 12 that Jabbar had last year in the Big 12. And I think that's something that Washington desperately needed.
No, you're absolutely right, because it's something that I know I've made this point a lot on the show, is pressure, especially from the interior, is something that can truly wreck a game, but something that can just really, it doesn't wreck a game, but something that can really just destroy an offensive coordinator's game plan is a lockdown cornerback. Somebody who you can just throw out on an island and just say, and which is something Jabbar Muhammad loves to do from, all the times that you've talked to him, that I've talked to him, something that he loves talking about, that he just wants to be on an island. And he feels way more comfortable in defense now compared to in the spring when, he kind of got cooked by Rome Odunze a decent amount, but in his respect, every single player on the defense did. There is no exceptions to that one. But, when we talk about the most impactful defensive transfers, another guy that I really wanted to highlight in this segment is Thaddeus Dixon, cornerback from Long Beach City College, who is just really, really impressive. I remember when we saw him in the spring, I feel like I turned to you and I just said, who is that? Before, we got our rosters and all the numbers, like this dude is just ripped. He just looks like a football player. And then you kind of watched him play throughout the spring. And then even into the fall, he's just somebody who Kalen DeBoer told us that he really, it did not take long for him to earn the team's respect. And he's a guy who is just really physical, has a great, just hard-nosed attitude for the game. And somebody who I think, especially because he's got so much more eligibility, is somebody who long-term could end up making a bigger impact just on this program than Jabbar Muhammad.
No doubt. I think because we kind of view Jabbar more than likely as a one and done guy. I mean, there's a chance. There's certainly a chance he could return, but I think that would be more or less like if he maybe misses a couple of games, doesn't have the season he wants to have. That would be the only reason I think Jabbar would come back. To your point on Dixon, they've got at least 3 years of him, 2 if not 3 years for sure. And I think this year is kind of a year where you get him into the system. He's certainly going to play a ton. He's not going to start, at least not week 1, but he's certainly going to get a lot of reps. And I think that's kind of more or less what you want, especially as you're building depth in the program moving forward, is saying, getting a veteran guy in who already knows the system and then can kind of carry that on for another year or two, because they truly haven't had that since the Kyler Gordon, Trent McDuffie era.
Right. And, since we're staying on this topic of transfers, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the safety position here for a minute or two. And I wanted to ask just kind of straight up, are you surprised that they didn't try to go after an impactful safety in the portal? Because I was, and it's no knock on either Dominique Hampton or Asa Turner, who are going to be the 2 starting safeties this year. But it's just kind of you look at the depth behind them. There's Vince Nunley, who I'm really high on. I think he's super talented. Mikel Esteen, who the coaching staff really likes. Tristan Dunn, I'm not really going to include in this conversation because he's somebody who's going to play way more Husky, that nickel position, than he is at safety. And then behind them are true freshmen and Diesel Gordon and Vincent Holmes. And I think both of them are talented players, but I kind of look at the room as a whole and say, why didn't they at least try to attack safety? And, the one guy that his name was tossed around a lot before he decided to enter the draft is, who would have been a week 1 opponent had he decided to stay in college 1 more year. J.L. Skinner from Boise State is a super impressive guy. And I like his tape a lot. And obviously he decided to enter the NFL. No harm in that. But I was just a little surprised that they didn't push a little bit harder to add another safety, like an experienced safety to this room.
I think the only reason they didn't is because as much as people want to view Asa and his maybe lack of tackling or lack of ability to tackle and consistency for the last couple of years, I still think they view him as a veteran, especially with Dom kind of next to him. I think if you were to bring in another, the problem is you kind of get into that Raylan Goforth territory. Like, okay, is the guy you're bringing in worth pushing down the guys that you have younger in the room? I don't think necessarily for this past class they were thinking of that. I do think, to your point, they could do that in this coming class, where let's add a veteran guy. And I think also there was, to your point, there was a limited number of guys at the position in the portal that they really would be better off getting. I think you're better off this year learning, okay, a full year of Vince Nunley healthy, what can he do? Tristan Dunn, is he able to take that next step next year, or do we need to go bring in somebody else? I think they have enough bodies in the room at the safety position to say, let's run with who we got now. We got the veterans. We got a guy. Everybody understands the scheme. I think that was also the other part is you don't want to bring in too many guys, especially guys who are going to be starters, have to learn a scheme. Jabbar can do it because he's already done it at the Big 12 level, but I don't think you want to go beyond that. I don't think you want to start adding 2, 3, 4 guys because then now there's kind of a lot more learning curve on the defensive side, especially.
No, that's a great point. And as we wrap up here, I got to remind everybody about our friends over at eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Husky Nation, let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items apply. Eligible items only and exclusions apply. All right. Now, we've got to talk about health. I know it's a tough thing to talk about, but it's something that we saw last year. The safety position was able to stay healthy for the most part when it was headlined by Alex Cook and Asa Turner, but there's a whole lot of questions, especially when we talk about the outside. Devon Banks missed time last year. Elijah Jackson missed time last year. Javion Green hurt himself in the spring, is fine now, but he was somebody who was thrust in as a true freshman, and the entire coaching staff had just straight up admitted to us at different points throughout spring and throughout the fall that he was not ready to play when he was asked to last year. And as somebody who was okay at times, there were some points where it's like, oh yeah, I see why they like him. Then there are other points where it's like, oh yeah, that's a true freshman out there on Troy Franklin. That's not great. So it's something where, do you think that, this one thing that I personally love about watching this Husky coaching staff do their jobs is the emphasis that they've put, and it's led by strength coach Ron McKeefrey, is on health. and on just recovery and ways to fuel your body. The whole nutrition team also does a great job of that. But it's something where, do you think that that's something that it's football and there are so many things to think about, but do you think that they can stay healthy this year?
I do. I mean, we've seen it in the fall camp. Last fall camp, Elijah Jackson was the guy like, hey, this is the next guy up. And then he got hurt literally like 4 or 5 days later. And Vince Nunley was another guy that I remember UWBC Chuck Morrell said, hey, this is going to be one of the guys this year. Again, bracket, as long as he can stay healthy, and then boom, out for the season, basically. So I think those are 2 guys right off the bat that they probably were counting on last year that they all of a sudden could not count on. And obviously it showed on the field with the amount of play that Julius Erving was able to get on the field, and then he got hurt. I think now they've had almost an entire offseason where guys, for the most part, have been healthy. I mean, they've kind of done a good job to limit the amount of reps the guys are getting. And obviously when you're playing defensive back, you're not necessarily going all out. You're not laying the hits. You're not doing stuff like that. So there's really there's not as much of a chance of getting hurt as, say, like an offensive lineman or a running back. I know 2 bad examples right there just because of yesterday's news. But again, the safety position, you're not seeing guys, laying full out, going hard. We saw guys stay in practice for probably, if it's a Saturday, they're diving for the ball. But today they were like, we'll just kind of let that one go over our head and call it a day. Because at the end of the day, the staff is really emphasized understanding the scheme and then turn the lights on Saturday and just play loose. I think that's kind of how the staff wants to build the defense. And that's actually, I think, allowed him to stay healthy this fall. And I think the key is just, can you still make it through next week and through the Boise State game healthy? Because once that depth starts getting tested, then you kind of get back into last season of, okay, well, it's not terrible, but it's also not great either.
Right. And that's something we'll talk about on the next segment as well. And speaking of just next segments, everyone needs to go check out the Ultimate College Football Preview that we put together. I had the pleasure of joining a couple of my co-hosts and just talking about where the Huskies stand in the Pac-12 this year. Go check that out. Just anywhere that you get your Locked On podcast, you'll find it there. Just check it out. It's really fun. We had a great time. But it's something where the Husky secondary is going to be so crucial for this defense. I know we've said that at every level of the defense, but it holds true in the secondary more than anything else because we know what the pass rush is going to do. We know what Edefon Ulofoshio can bring to this team if he stays healthy, but we don't know what a healthy secondary looks like. And we don't know really what it feels kind of just, like a shot to say this, but we don't know what a competent secondary looks like because it didn't look like that at times last year when it was, it was a true freshman on one side and a third stringer on the other side. And no, I'm not trying to take any shots when I say that, but that's just the reality of the situation. And they didn't seem fully prepared for that situation. And that's something where this coaching staff need to do a better job. And I feel like they have done that of just making improvements and being a little bit more prepared for some of the situations that they might find themselves in. But at the same time, I really like the talent that we've seen, especially from this is Wednesday when we're recording this. We just came back from the final open practice that we're going to be able to see before the Boise State game. And the secondary just looks better than it did at any point last fall. And there's so much to like. There are a lot of guys in this room that really just seem to have a nose for the football. One guy that just always seems to make a play on the ball is Michaela Steen. And it's just, really, he's another guy who you can talk about. Just can he stay healthy? He missed a week and a half or so of camp earlier on after suffering what looked like a concussion after making a spectacular diving interception. But it's just something where they need to be able to show that they can be healthy before we can continue to just say, yes, this is going to be a much improved part of this Husky defense this year.
Yeah, I think the frustrating part about that is just you can't speak it into existence. You have to let it come to fruition. And I think that's kind of where the frustrating part is, not only for us, but UW fans, to say, okay, all these guys are good. Like in their positions. And I think also it's kind of one thing we're not glossing over per se, but especially the kind of the moves that have been made, like I mentioned with Mish moving to nickel, you mentioned Dom moving to safety. I think that's their better positions. When Dom was a corner, it was okay, but I think they could do better there. Dom's kind of skill set is better at safety and laying the lumber. So I think that all these guys are in the right position. I think last year was more of a trial. It was kind of like, to your point, the staff came in, Jimmy Lake, to his credit, kind of left the cupboard pretty bare. All things considered, right? Because again, you had Kyler and Trent, but everybody knew they were gone. So there was no way that they were going to come back for DeVore. And the gap between them and the guys behind them was bigger than I think ever in the Peterson era. Like there was never that big of a drop off, just either in experience or talent. Now, some of those guys have taken the next step. I mean, Elijah Jackson was one of those guys at cornerback where he was like, hey, this is going to be a long rangey guy. He's same high school as Mikkel from Lawndale. but it never happened. It didn't come together. This fall camp, Elijah's looked a lot better. He had a forced fumble. Chuck Morrell made it clear he's the second starting cornerback. We'll have that story up on Sports Illustrated later this afternoon. You'll be able to read it actually tomorrow. Now that
check it out.
Right, yeah. But Chuck was also very adamant that it wasn't just fall camp. Elijah has been consistent all year, and I think that's it's both a combination of progress and those guys just getting older and being more involved and things like that. Because I think Elijah was too young to play last year. We saw obviously Javion was too young to play last year, and this year I think there won't be as steep of a learning curve. I mean, even today when we're looking at practice, I mean, Jalen Polk and some of these Roman Dunze are making these catches, and the coverage is right there. There's no doubt about the coverage now. It's just the balls are better from Penix, but I think it's improving. It's an improving sign to see, hey, look, they're not getting cooked as much as they were last fall and this spring.
No, that's a great point because there's so much to like, and I know something we're going to discuss on the next segment when we talk a little bit about just some of the younger guys like Caleb Presley, Leroy Bryant, Curley Reed, especially, and Vincent Holmes and Diesel Gordon, just to round it out. So I'm not I'm making sure to include everybody when I say those things. But there really is a lot of talent. It's something where we saw Devon Banks have a really, really great couple of weeks. It was like, ooh, is this somebody who could also end up being a player? And obviously only so many guys can be on the field at one time. But it's starting to get to a point where I don't want to overhype it and just say, yeah, this is going to be, so much to like, oh yeah, this guy's really good. This guy's really good, because it's just, quite frankly, and again, no disrespect intended, it's not at the level of a room where it's, yeah, there's Sidney Jones and Kevin King, and then behind him is Keith Taylor and Elijah Molden, and behind them is Trent and Kyler. It's not that. It can't be that. But if it can be serviceable, this team can go a really long way.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of years down the road when we have Curley and Leroy and Caleb starting, I think that's kind of, but the gap between where those guys are right now, to your point, and where they're going to be in a couple of years, I think that's why you can't count on them this year. Like, hey, look, they've done a good job recruiting the room, they've done a good job getting bodies in that room. But the question now is, can you put it all together? And also, not just for this year, but can you put it on a consistent basis? Obviously, we're talking about this year for the most part, but as we go into the next segment and we start to kind of think about down the road, going back to the other point, do they need to keep bringing in guys? Because we talked about that earlier today. Do they need to bring in a cornerback? Do they need to bring in another couple transfers? Like, how is that going to work? I think the point of this season is almost going to be like what the running back position was last year. Can you prove that, hey, we can go get a guy like Dylan Johnson from the portal and say, hey, you know what? I normally would never have thought about Washington, but because the way I saw you guys run last year, it's actually more appealing now. I think this is kind of going to be the same situation this year for the defensive backfield, especially the safeties.
No, you're absolutely right about that. Now, I just remind everybody, this show is sponsored by Betterhelp. There was a time last year in the middle of the football season where I was really unsure about what I was going through in my life. I didn't know what the right path was for me. And, that I had a lot of decisions that I had to make about my career. And I feel like some of those have worked out. And I give a lot of credit to that for therapy, because sometimes in life we are faced with tough choices and the path forward isn't always clear. And I've had a lot of help with my life in getting to the right point with that, and trusting yourself to make decisions that align with your values is like anything. The more you practice it, the easier it gets. And I'm somebody who would recommend therapy to anybody, because it can just be so helpful in so many different ways. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, I recommend giving BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you're able to switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedoncollege today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedoncollege. All right, Lars, we got to talk about the young guys. We can talk a little bit about recruiting, which, we love to do it here on the show, because we love covering recruiting, especially as it pertains to, the Huskies and everything moving forward, not taking shots or anything when I say that. But there's so much excitement around this 2023 class. And honestly, I think rightfully so. I'm personally really high on Curley Reed. I think he's a really talented prospect and is somebody who could make a big impact, not necessarily this year, but in a year or two is going to be somebody who is going to be, just has the potential to be an all conference kind of player. I almost said all Pac-12, but an all Big Ten player as we move forward here in the new world of college football. And the same can be said about Caleb Presley. And honestly, You could also say that about Leroy Bryant, a cornerback, because these are three guys who are really athletic, who just love to play man coverage, which is something that this coaching staff really loves. And I think could really end up being super successful in the Big Ten, which is something I won't talk about today. I will get into that on another show. I promise you that. But there's just so much extra that you can talk about with just cornerback play in the Big Ten. But no, I think that these are a really talented group of guys. And I know you've had a couple of extensive conversations with Leroy Bryant especially. So I'd love for you to just shine some extra light on this.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Leroy, when I talked to him right before he came up to enroll at UW in June, he struck me as the guy who they're going to obviously he's not going to see much of the field this year just because of the number. Again, that's not a knock on him. I think that Caleb and Leroy are in the same boat. But I think he's a guy where, especially when I saw him the first couple of days of fall camp, he just looks like he's almost ready to go. He's going to need that first year to kind of get fully into the system, especially with McKeefrey, learn the defensive backfield. Because one thing that actually a lot of guys have noted is this scheme is different and a little more complex than Jimmy Lake's, which I'm not sure if that's a shot at Jimmy or if that's just, kind of a mixed bag of the two. But it is true because Ace is required to do a lot. The corners and that communication is very, very crucial. But Leroy, just as a guy, when you just look at him, he looks like he's ready to play the part. He's long, he's athletic, he played receiver, he played basketball. So he's a guy who I almost like Elijah Jackson. He's probably going to have that 39 to 40, 41 inch vertical if he's on probably a sophomore, junior year. So I think he's a guy that down the road certainly is going to be one, almost kind of like almost in the Jordan Miller. He's a little bit bigger than Jordan, but they remind me of kind of the same similar skill set.
No, I like that comp a lot. And honestly, I have to say, as much as we do like to run down Jimmy and his coaching staff on the show, I don't think that's a shot at them at all. There's just so much talent in that secondary, and to Jimmy's credit, did a great job of developing that it didn't need to be a super complex coverage on the back end. Because that's something I remember talking about with Chuck Morrell last spring, where I said this last staff had a lot of success in the secondary. And they've done so many things in the back end, and how much of that is going to stay, how much of that is going to go. And one of the first things he said was, there's only really so much you can do in the back end. It's not like, I'm going to bring something in out of left field, because there's only so many different kinds of coverages that you can run. So that's something where we didn't see a lot of different stuff. But I think the one thing that was really different is Jimmy did seem to love to play a lot of cover three, and that just kind of style of defense where these corners, and it starts with this coaching staff, and they love guys that are just going to man up and play on an island. And I think that all three of these corners are really, really good at that. And I think that that's something that can be just really crucial moving forward. And I think that, especially as we kind of talk about the safeties, because we can look at what Diesel Gordon brings to the table, what Vincent Holmes brings to the table, is it just kind of signifies a shift in just what is in the room now and kind of where they're going. And we talk about 2024 commit Elias Johnson at corner, who I know I was talking to Mike Varela, who said he might end up playing some safety as well. But he's somebody who I really like as a corner because of his length and his athleticism and what he can bring at that position. But when you look at just what Vincent Holmes and Diesel Gordon bring to the table, as we talk about the safety position, they are both really rangy. Vincent Holmes I think that there's going to be a point in 2 years where somebody's just going to say, yeah, Vincent Holmes is the fastest guy in this team. He brings that kind of speed to the table. And all you have to do is turn on his high school film and watch for about a minute and a half, and you say, oh yeah, that makes sense. But I think that there's just such a shift coming in that room from where Asa and Dom are right now to where the coaching staff wants to go in the future. And I think the true freshman this year, the class of 2023, really signifies the beginning of that shift.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think the one thing that if you kind of look at the similarities of what all those guys do, they're fast and fluid. That's really what Morrell likes more than anything, is guys that once you learn this game, you just don't even think, just do it. And I think that's kind of where some of the veterans actually kind of struggled, is they've almost tried to do too much. And I think that's kind of, to these younger guys' credit, they're getting a chance to learn from these older guys, so they don't have to think as much when they get in, either this year or down the road, because now they're going to understand the scheme. And when you look at the body types, about Vincent Nunley, he looks like he can play receiver. Yep. It just looks like he's naturally gifted to play a receiver. And there's so many other guys that kind of fit that similar mold, to where it's like, okay, Peyton Waters is ranked as a 4-star receiver by some outlets. So, he's going to play safety at Washington, but that more speaks to your point of kind of, they want not the definition of athlete, right? Because you want guys that actually know the position, that actually you don't have to coach a brand new position to, but to where you can kind of play multiple positions. They want guys that are longer. The days of, 5'10", 5'11", safeties are kind of out the door. You don't necessarily want a 6'4", 6'5" guy. Dom's a little on the higher end there. But I think almost like a hybrid of Mish, Asa, and Dom is what they want in safeties. Now, I'm not saying all three of those guys, you put them together, but at the same point, that style where you're long enough to where you can cover, you're athletic enough to where you can run, and then you just don't think and you play. I think that's kind of what they're looking for.
I've got a fun question for you here because I've got my answer, but I want to hear who you think. If we're going to exclude the true freshmen from this conversation, if you kind of look at the cornerbacks in the room right now, again, excluding the true freshmen, who do you think best signifies, just in terms of play style, body type, whatever it might be, who do you think best signifies where this room is going?
That's a good question because I don't think it's as much Thaddeus Dixon. I think they kind of want one. They want one of him, but I don't think in terms of if you clone 4 or 5 DBs to go across the board. I want to say Leroy Bryant because of his potential, not what he's currently at. But
again, excluding the true freshman.
Right. So I'm trying to think like who in that next kind of round, because other than that, it's not Barkins. It's not. I would almost have to say Dixon, but maybe just a little different body type. But kind of again, there's also kind of because if we take out the freshmen in that group, there is depth. But Javion Green. He's athletic, but there's maybe a mix of Thaddeus Dixon and Javion Green. I think that's kind of what they want. So
Thaddeus Dixon was my answer because not only of the body type, the length, the height, it's all there, but it's the attitude. It's the attitude to just line up. I'm going to go get the ball. I'm going to play man coverage. I really like that. And my second answer, not necessarily in terms of body type, because he's a little bit on the smaller side, but with the athleticism and everything else he brings to the table, is Devon Banks. I think that's the other kind of guy where it's like, yeah, and when I look at Devon Banks, I see just kind of the general mold of what I think Caleb Presley could be. I think Caleb Presley is going to be better than Devon Banks, but I just like his attitude when it comes to getting the football, his fluidity in coverage, and he's really impressed me this fall. I think that he's really come a long way, and as somebody who I don't necessarily think that he's going to be a star in this defense, but I think he's going to have a role and he's going to make some big time plays throughout the course of the season.
I think the one thing that we're not necessarily forgetting, but almost as I think about it, not that these guys don't have ball skills, but that's not necessarily their calling card. Like you don't think of Thaddeus Dixon as a ball hawking cornerback. That's not to disrespect him in any way, shape, or form, but he almost seems like a runner and hitter than he does a guy that's going to actually be that athletic to go up and get it. I think, again, excluding the freshman, right? Yeah. I would put. I could see Devon there. I think the thing with Devon is just, can he stay healthy? And again, that goes back to our earlier question of, there's so many of these guys that have potential. Julius Irvin was a guy last year who had plenty of potential, just throughout his career couldn't stay healthy and had to call it a wrap. He had so much talent, and he honestly probably could play better than he would, but just couldn't stay healthy. And it's not a knock on Julius because that's football. Things happen like that, And so I think if Devon can stay healthy for a full year, I think he's the answer. I just don't know if he can stay healthy.
I like that a lot. And it's something where, it's somebody who I know we haven't touched on very briefly, but and we can do it really quickly as we begin to wrap up here. But we can talk about Darren Barkins and just kind of what he brings, because he is an impressive athlete when you look at him at times. He's a little bit on the lighter side, but he's somebody where it's like, I can kind of see why they took him. I think he's a depth piece, kind of in the similar thing to what we were just talking about with Devon Banks, where I don't know if he's ever really going to be a star in this defense, but he's going to have a role because the coaching staff seems to really like him.
Yeah, well, I think one thing going back to the other staff and that this staff has held true is you have to play special teams if you want to see the field. And I think both of those guys are actually good special teamers. Barkins in particular, that's where his calling card was when he got to play at Oregon. So I think if either of those two guys can kind of start to maybe flash on special teams, then one of them is going to have more of an increased role on the defense as the season progresses.
I like that a lot. And I think that's a good place for us to wrap up here for today. Lars, as usual, I want to thank you for joining me today. I want to remind everybody to like, comment, subscribe, follow us on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple, Spotify, wherever else. Drop us a 5-star review. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate all the feedback, all the comments we've been getting about every single thing. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us on Twitter either. I'm at Tomashoff34. He's at Lars Hanson. And just subscribe and make sure to tune in tomorrow when we're going to just run down everything that we've seen so far in fall camp. As it comes to a close, we just felt that there's no better way to prep you for a game week than maybe with a little bit of depth chart talk, a little bit of just running down, some standouts, everything that we've seen, and maybe we'll get into some predictions as well. I'm a jinx, so I might hold off, but we'll see. Lars, again, thank you. Make sure you subscribe. Drop us that 5-star review. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and we'll see you tomorrow, everydayers.